I won't be talking a lot about cognitive science writ small, unfortunately, although that's where one of my real passions is, and in social neuroscience, which is where my own work took me 20 years as a research and teaching faculty at some small liberal arts college. I've had an epiphany about 10 years ago that we're fundamentally evolved as social beings who happen to leverage that apparatus to do information processing as opposed to the other way around, which is what I grew up with. And I did my PhD under some of the real architects of the cognitive revolution, where we were thinking very narrowly about information processing as the fundamental characteristic of human beings. And that, of course, our cognitive capacities were what set us apart from everything else. I think what the evolutionary sciences, evolutionary anthropology, to some extent evolutionary psychology, have shown us in recent years, for me convincingly, is that we're fundamentally social animals. So unfortunately, I won't be talking a lot about those sorts of things, but that's, I think, for both Elle and I and the other members of the Action Lab, it's those sorts of larger and disciplinary questions that really inform our passion for the work that we're doing. So I'm going to start off with a few introductory slides that I don't usually do. So let's talk about social innovation. Write it really large. What we do, I think all of us, not just at Action Lab and not just at EdPlus or Arizona State University, but what we're interested in here as educators is social innovation. That's right, I switched adapters. So we could take any one of a number of routes here, but consider this data set from Current Population Survey, U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. The earnings and unemployment rates on the left, earnings on the right, as a function of educational attainment. Think about what it means to have less than a high school education or a high school diploma, some college but no degree, an associate, a bachelor's or a master's, a professional or a doctorate degree. The trends here are unmistakable, and if we think about the really large number of people that occupy this space, that's a serious amount of unemployment. It's a non-livable wage, and that's only going to be exacerbated as we move into a more technological future. I'm not a naysayer with respect to artificial intelligence, but I do think that we are going to have to adapt as a society, and part of that adaptation will be becoming educated enough, data literate, as well as math literate and language literate, literate enough to be able to work with this new world. And there are going to continue to be haves and have-nots. I think our goal in a socially relevant or a socially mindful enterprise ought to be to reduce the number of have-nots to an absolute minimum, if not eliminate that. That's a massive task, but one that I think we should keep our eyes on. This is in the UK, in our own country, my country of origin, the United States, with recent elections. We've really come to appreciate that perhaps our democratic process could be guided a little bit more thoughtfully had we had a little bit more education across our base in the United States. I'll try to say that sensitively.
Why?
In the U.S., we simply aren't graduating enough college students. Now that's, I'm talking to a country that's relatively similar in many respects. I think as one of the have countries, that's a rough thing to say, but it's still true in some of the most developed countries on the planet. In 2017, there were about 20 million college and university students in the US. That's a number that includes about 40%, only 40% of our 18 to 24-year-olds. That means we've got 60% of our 18 to 24-year-olds that aren't participating in higher education. Globally, of course, that's even a bigger challenge. Between 2000 and 2014, so over that 4-year span, the number of college students around the world more than doubled, from 100 million to 200, a little over 200 million. And that trend is a demand trend. It's not that we're now saturated. As we look at the demand that's going to continue to grow, let's take just one particular country, 30 million students coming, new university level students coming online every year in India alone. Now, India can't take care of educating that number of students. The United States cannot take care of educating that number of students. And as a world right now, we can't take care of educating that number of students just from a single country. The demand for higher education is going to grow. And if we think about the next 15 years or so, a little bit less, taking us up to, let's say, 2030. We're going to go from around a demand, an overall demand worldwide of about 160 million to a demand of over 400 million students. Let's put that in context. How many, does anybody know what the student body size is? I don't here at University of Sydney. Any guess?
Approximately 40,000.
How many?
40,000.
About 40? We're at about 100,000 at University of Arizona. That's about 70 on our face-to-face campuses. We have 4 bricks and mortar campuses with about 70 or 80,000, and another 30,000 or so in a strictly online program. It's that strictly online program that motivates a lot of the research that Elle and I do, and I'm trying to build a case for us here as we think about that. But let's take a number of 80,000, a very large size university. To meet the demand by 2030, we would have to build 4 of those universities that each serve 80,000 plus students. And we would have to build 4 of those every week, 52 weeks of a year for the next 15 years before the demand and the supply curves would cross and we could meet that. That is not a sustainable trajectory into the future. We will not accomplish this. It strikes me that at the beginning of the 20th century, we went through a kind of paradigm shift, a revolution in the way that we did education. We woke up and we realized as we moved into an industrial age that it was important for everyone to have, or for a very large number of people, to have enough education. You didn't have to have an Oxford education or Harvard education, but you had to have enough education so that you could be middle management in industry. We realized that we weren't meeting that, and that we weren't going to be able to scale the small liberal arts college model. So we collectively around the world embraced a kind of large land grant, state-run university system. University of California, where I was educated my PhD, the California State University system, these Arizona State University system, probably many of the universities here emerged during that era. And that served us very well for the next 100 years. I think we're at another breaking point now where we're realizing this model now will not scale to meet the demand. And so, I'll steal a few slides out of our president's book. It's actually a book with what sounds like a rather parochial name, but it's a fantastic book called The New American University. And in that, he suggests that the model for the new university that should be emerging needs to be focused on knowledge creation. Now that separates us from, say, some of the for-profits that we're focused on on profit, and as you probably know, the for-profit online education market in the United States rose and fell spectacularly. They simply did not accomplish the things that they set out to accomplish. One reason is they were not focused on knowledge creation. Around that, we can think of traditional, what's now become traditional campus, we'll call those campus immersion experiences. We can service a fair number of students that way. Around that, we need to be building out, in order to meet the demand, technology-enabled digital immersion experiences, so online education, but online education not in a MOOC-like form, an online education that basically mimics the on-ground university, the on-campus university in its function and mission, but not in its methods. I think, I've already forgotten your name.
Oh, John.
John. John's comments about the design of the online experience. We need to be thinking about how do we leverage these new tools, not to approximate what's going on in the classroom, but to reinvent the classroom in the digital age. Surrounding that, though, we have even more opportunities for open scale courses. MOOC, the MOOC movement at Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and others. It was a spectacular success in some ways. It opened up the world of education to people that wouldn't have otherwise gotten it. And it was a spectacular failure in other ways. The knowledge gaps that we thought we were going to close only got wider as people like me availed themselves of these wonderful MOOCs, and the people that didn't have a pathway into higher education struggled in them because it took such self-regulation, and it took knowing the norms, the implicit norms of higher education in order to be able to succeed in those spaces. With that preamble, I'm going to give a very quick introduction to who the Action Lab is, and talk even more briefly about an efficacy study. Of course, we don't just want to roll out another failed experiment, digitize 20th century education, have it fail, and have students who have degrees but actually don't know anything. So as the Action Lab was set up at Arizona State University about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, the mandate from the president was about that digital immersion sphere, and he said, I want to know, does it work? And does it work for everybody? That is, if we have something that works on average, because we're averaging over the majority of people who already get it, we're not serving the population that we want. We need to do disaggregated research, build in interactions to our models so that we can assess for each specific population, and if it was possible to be able to assess for each individual student, is it working for you? Doing that at scale, as I'm sure you all know, is not trivial. So the Action Lab is a dedicated research lab for scalable innovation in digital teaching and learning. Three core characteristics of what we do include insight. So we want to be able to leverage disciplinary work, bring people in from education, and people in from industry, people in from other aspects of the academy, not just cognitive scientists, anthropologists. I would love to have people in our lab that study the evolution of human cooperation. What could we learn about the ability to leverage the tools in our digital environment by having those sorts of folks in? So a very broad disciplinary focus, but also focused on research design, and careful research design and methodology. Actionable. Our work needs to be actionable. We're not just another academic unit. We are situated we're situated in EdPlus, which is the umbrella organization over all of that digital teaching and learning in MOOC-like space. And part of what we have to do is to help educate and inform our instructional designers, educational designers. So they're EDs down here, I believe, IDs in the States. Those are our primary clients. So if we can find out what works and communicate that to them so that they can make the product better next week or next month or next year, then we're succeeding. So disciplinary, actionability, and then impact. The charter of Arizona State University is always hanging in front of us, literally and figuratively. We need to be making sure that the individual student succeeds. We can't measure success as a business model. We have to measure success as a learning model, whether our students are learning. 3 tracks of work that we do. Online efficacy, which is what I'll start to tell you about a little bit. Does it work? Learning analytics falls within that. We want to know all different grains, from a very fine grain, clickstream, learning analytic approach, all the way up to a larger scale, which is what I'll show you today, whether things work. Our open scale environment is our second track of work. We have something called the Global Freshman Academy that I'm particularly excited about. We're just moving into an efficacy study on that. This is a kind of MOOC 2.0. They are MOOCs in that they're massive, they're online, and they're courses, but they're not MOOCs in the way that they function. They're specifically designed to offer educational experiences at the first year student level. So history courses, English writing courses, literature courses, mathematics, college algebra, the sorts of things that a typical first year student might take. And to offer those students, offer that to students for free, but then provide a pathway into higher education. The way that we do that is we leverage the ID verification abilities so that students can take their exams in a proctored environment. They're taught by the same faculty that teach the courses on campus and in our online environment. They have exams that are very similar exams to the ones that they would take if they were on campus or online. But then at the end of the experience, if those students pass the course, they have the opportunity to purchase college credit for that. That is, they can convert that credit for about 30 or 40 cents on the dollar, so at a substantially discounted rate. And our goal, our hope, is that we'll be able to attract students who are geographically challenged, who are historically disadvantaged, who maybe tried this once 10 years ago, went out into the workforce, and now are going to be able to actually succeed where they weren't able to 10 years ago. So our Global Freshman Academy and open scale courseware. Third track of work is around emerging technology and in particularly adaptive. And I'll say just a word about an experiment in the adaptive space before we finish up today. So very quickly, without a lot of details, I'm very happy to answer methodological details later. And by the way, I should invite conversation. Feel free, we're small enough. Feel free to just stop questions of clarification or content, and we'll let that shape our talk. That would be great. So I won't take you through a lot of the details of the methodology, but if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. So a large-scale efficacy study, taking the efficacy approach from the medical industry, where we're wanting to know not just effectiveness, does this particular thing work for this particular population, but asking it more generally, as a use case scenario, do we have reason to believe that this thing would work in general, in a best case scenario for that population, for a much larger population? So what we did is we took our ASU online population, which are these 30,000 degree-seeking students. We compared them to our face-to-face population, not because we want to emphasize differences, but because face-to-face kind of sets gold standard. And what we have seen in the past, even just 10 years ago, maybe 10 or 15 percentage point gaps between university students, community college in our Washington and Virginia states, but also four-year universities, gaps between face-to-face and online achievement with grade-based metrics. So we decided to look at all of the courses at the university that had enough enrollment in identical courses. There were 252 of those courses with enough enrollment, several hundred students in both the online and the face-to-face enrollments over the last 6 years. That netted us about 160,000 students, a little over 1 million student course observations, primarily focused, not exclusively, but primarily focused on grade-based outcomes. We took a subset of these courses and did some learning analytics on those, and we're now scaling that out to the entire set and to courses beyond this as well. This is a subset of about 1,000 undergraduate courses that we could have looked at. So we looked at 5 of those courses. I won't tell you about this research today, but just to let you know that it's out there. These were introductory courses like Introduction to Sociology, Introduction to Psychology, English Literature, English, College Algebra, courses along those lines. And we did a deep dive into the learning analytics at those, looking at the click streams and asking which design features actually worked for those students. Found interesting things like a strong negative correlation with using a nonlinear model between discussion forum use and passing and completion in an English class. And we, you know, at first we thought, well, okay, that tells us we're doing something wrong because there's no way. But the methodology, we scoured it. Sure enough, partnering with our instructional designers, a couple of them that had some experience with that class said, "Oh no, yeah, that's what I would have predicted in that class." Out in the tail, as you move higher and higher and higher up into the clickstream usage for this, you quickly move past students who are using it at an optimal level, and you find students that are using it because they're confused, because they don't know what to do, and the easiest thing to do is to fall back on something that's as much like a social media platform as possible. So we did find some interesting things in there, and as I said, I won't focus on that today. We've taken the efficacy study itself and moved that into a number of matching methods, some really interesting things in statistics, including propensity score matching, exact matching, course and exact matching. Our goal was to come at this from as many different statistical modeling angles as possible to make sure that we're not just getting an artifact when we find our results. And a gap analysis, performance gap analysis that I'll say a few words about. I won't walk you through the details of the model, but here's a typical model. What we did is we constructed a relatively straightforward logistic regression model, optimized across all 252 of those courses, but then applied that model, the same model, to each of the courses individually. Particularly interested in modality, face-to-face versus online, and controlling for things like your academic prowess coming into the course. For your age, our online students are about 10 years older on average. A number of other important covariates, and then a number of interaction variables that allow us to talk about socioeconomic status, about part-time versus full-time students, which is an important proxy for things like life gets in the way, I have to work or have children, ethnicity, and gender. The outcomes that we looked at, grade-based outcomes, were completion, which is simply not withdrawing from the course by the time you get to the end. Passing, and this is the second one and third one are conditional on the previous ones. It's given that you completed, what's the probability that you passed the course, so a conditional probability. And then given that you passed, what's the probability that you got a B or better grade as opposed to a C or a D grade. The results, observed success rates over here. This is just kind of a traffic report collecting the statistics here, but you can see that the completion rates for both online and on campus are relatively high. By the way, there are some, that not in this group given your backgrounds, but there are some groups who just assume that our online program are going to have MOOC-like success rates in terms of completion, 7 to 10% completion rates. So again, emphasizing these aren't MOOCs, these are highly motivated, degree-seeking students. And so we get very similar, just in the observed data, very similar completion rates, conditional probability of passing, heavily favoring, by about 5 percentage points, the face-to-face group. And mastery, not much of a difference. These are 3 standard errors across there, not a significant difference in this group. If we apply the model and we ask, what's the prediction for the average ASU student, and we then do the statistics on those on the modeled data, this pattern actually reverses. We get an even stronger effect of completion, so at about 98% predicted completion rate. If the average online student was to take an online class, this is what we would, if the average face-to-face student was to take an online class, this is what we would predict. If that average student was to take a face-to-face course, that's what we predict. Passing, we still get a slight advantage, but substantially less than what we saw with the observed rates. And again, the mastery rates turn out to be pretty similar. Now, it's tricky here. If you're a statistician, you're going to raise your hand and say, wait a minute, you're arguing for a null hypothesis, which is exactly what we're doing. We want to, in the world of learning analytics and big data, where we have data coming out of our ears, we have to change the way that we think about statistics and p-values. And of course, I'm sure everybody is aware of the sort of p-hacking literature, anti-p-hacking literature that's been out there. So this is not new news. I think it is important to set up statistical tests that allow us to ask, should I accept the null hypothesis? Should I say no, in spite of looking to the contrary, I actually see no difference between these. Here's a little bit different way of visualizing this data. So for each of these graphs, it's the probability of succeeding given that you're online versus the probability of succeeding that you're on campus. Each of these represents one of the 252 courses. The size of the bubble is the online enrollment, with the largest of these at about 40,000 students. That's across 6 years in a freshman English class. If the online and the on-campus probabilities of succeeding were identical, they should fall along the main diagonal. And if they were identical and very high, as in the case of completion, you would expect them to cluster right up in this corner. So this gives a way of visualizing how those courses fall and whether they favor face-to-face, as you see with this cluster, or whether they favor online, or whether we should be accepting the null hypothesis. We did all sorts of tests across different sorts of academic fields. I'll show you only this one. If we look at the 61 science, technology, engineering, and mathematics courses, this is how those cluster. You'll note that those largely make up the courses that are doing a little bit better on the passing variable. We could talk about those online gaps, the difference between face-to-face and online. What I've done here is just to look at the gap by academic discipline. Anything falling to the right of the vertical line argues that online is doing a little bit better. Anything to the left argues that face-to-face. What you can see is that across the academic disciplines, things are pretty much out there at about 3.5 or 4 percentage points. If we look at passing, everything is slightly to the left, some non-significantly so, some getting outside that 5 percentage point kind of meaningfulness boundary. And that was arbitrary. We set that as kind of an effect size where we would start to really care about these things. But you'll notice that those are some of the STEM classes, and that's great. It gives us an opportunity to know where our instructional designers should focus as they design these online programs. Mastery, the real story here, is high variability, and again, that's great, and that's probably to be expected. The factors that go into predicting whether a student is going to really master the material are varied, and it's a lot higher dimensionality predictor factors than on completion and passing.
Can I just ask about
Please.
these online courses?
Yeah.
So, is there individualized feedback within those courses? Is there, either, God forbid, discussion boards? You know,
Yes.
I mean, MOOCs are one thing, but I'm just not clear what you're including or what the average course would include as an online course.
That's a great question. You're not going to be surprised at this point in the talk to know that one of my conclusions on this, my primary conclusion, is that there's not much of a difference. Where we saw 10 percentage point gaps, now we're seeing no gap, perhaps a gap that's even moved to the other side. And where there are gaps, important as they are, they're relatively small. So it's a success story, but the question then becomes a causal one. Well, why? What happened to close these gaps? And my best answer to that, I think, may address your question. We take these courses and rather expensively, we wrap them in several layers of online support systems. A student comes in to ASU Online, they get an academic advisor, just like on campus, but they also get a success coach. This is somebody that monitors the behavior, looks for triggers. They've got a relatively small number of students that they have to shepherd, and we'll look at things that no academic advisor has the time to do. We've set up a technology engine around that to be able to provide those success coaches with the kinds of triggers that they would need to know when to reach out and contact a student. They get a financial advisor. Of course, many of our students are doing this because they're working somewhere, they're struggling to make ends meet, and to know that there's some funds available, or to be able to project how they're doing in order to budget their time is helpful. In addition to that, we have a team of about 30 instructional designers who make exactly the sorts of decisions about the things that you were asking. So an instructional designer is not an expert in the subject matter, they're an expert in pedagogy. And in particular, they're an expert in online pedagogy. So they can work with faculty who are content experts and who generally know nothing about teaching an online course. I should pause and put this in a larger context. I told you about our 4 on-campus campuses, the 5th one being ASU Online. What I didn't tell you is that all of these students can only take online courses. All of these students cannot take ASU Online courses, but they can take digital courses, online courses that are offered by the faculty. The ASU Online has no real input to. We consult when a faculty is interested. We don't provide the support services, and they're not required to put those courses through our quality control and through our instructional design lens. Those courses don't typically perform very well, particularly for first-year students. In fact, there was recently a ban on teaching first-year students with these I-courses, as they're called. So it's all of the support structure. It's the instructional designer who can work with a faculty member and say, you can't just throw a discussion board in there. You have to do it for a purpose. Are you interested in building social networks? Well, let's talk about how you're going to assign students to groups. Are you going to require them to do it? That is, are you going to make points available for this? That induces a particular kind of incentive structure and may lead to students gaming the system. On the other hand, if you don't have that, that may signal to the students that it's not important. So it's not just, do I use tool X? It's, dear faculty member, tell me what you're interested in doing, and I can help you find the tool that will help you to do that. And I can show you these other tools and tell you whether they'd be relevant.
I guess I ask because, I mean, clearly as you're demonstrating the gaps between face-to-face and what you deliver as online is quite small.
Yes.
And I guess one of the discussion points here is about the financial ones, and a lot of the decisions we make around teaching and around shifting things to online are actually financial decisions, not pedagogical decisions.
And in this, we actually just finished a study. Our managing director, who I failed to introduce, Lou Pugliese, was the founding CEO of Moodle. He was then the CEO of Blackboard when Blackboard acquired Moodle. They brought him in He did that for a few years. 2 years ago, he got together with our president and our dean and CEO at EdPlus, and they constructed the Action Lab. So Lou is kind of the brains and the market analysis around what we do. Lou just finished writing a large Gates-funded study called a return on impact study, a return on investment study. We're now doing the second phase of that. But the question was, is this a cheap way to go? And the answer was no. If you want to do this well, this is going to cost you. Our students pay about the same tuition. In fact, I think they pay about $500 more a year than our on-campus students pay in order to pay for these additional services. And then we put in additional money from the university to make sure that that's working.
So has he published that?
That is just coming out. I believe it was just published, and I'll give you my card before you leave, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it.
So that's my next question. How did you politically get that decision making to occur?
It started at the top. We were lucky in that respect. Our president said, "We will do this. We will be the best at it, and we will figure out how to do it well. We'll invest the money that other smaller institutions can invest in order to do this sort of research so that we can answer those questions." So that's part of our mandate, is to put not just the, hey, we're doing a good job out there, although I think it is important for people to know that it's possible, but now to start putting out the best practices. And we've been meeting with centers around, like your own center here, Simon Buckingham-Sham's center around the corner at University of Technology, Sydney. We met with Mark Knight and others at UNSW yesterday. These centers are popping up everywhere that are cranking out really good digital tools and the research around whether or not those work or not. So I think we're going to see in the learning analytics world a real move towards validating those tools, weeding out the ones that don't work, and then making those available, often, especially if they're designed at the university, and open out there in the public for free to use. That's a perfect transition to my colleague Elle's work on non-cognitive. So I want to show you just one quick thing, and I'm not even going to break these graphs up because I want to get through it quickly. But this was a gap analysis. Instead of looking at the difference between face-to-face and online, we looked at the difference, say, between, and I know you can't read this, between males and females, between high and low socioeconomic status. Each of these lines, there are the two large ones, shows the gap. This would be the gap. If you're full-time, the gap between, if you're face-to-face, the gap between being a part-time student, where you've got about a 70% chance of completing the course, and being a full-time student, where you've got about a 98% chance. If you're online, in the green, that gap turns out to be smaller. Most of the other cases for completion, for passing, and for mastery, as we disaggregate this for all different sorts of students, first generation, part-time, underrepresented minority, low socioeconomic status, what we find is that that gap stays relatively small. As we look across the disciplines, there are some places where we really want to focus on. Women don't do typically as well online, particularly in the science and technology courses. Great, that gives us something to focus our design team at. Where are we introducing hegemonic design biases into our classes that can be eliminated? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Elle and let her tell you about something you're probably going to care a lot more about than the efficacy work. I will put that in context. The things that we're moving on to as a lab include a continued focus on student success, learning analytics, ramping that up, some rather banal things about delivery method, like whether it's a long or a short course. Does that matter, and does that matter by discipline? Course design features, so doing a systematic validity on these tools of validity analysis. And then some of the stuff that I'm most excited about, that Elle will now talk about, motivational metacognitive, social, and other things that have traditionally fallen into the non-cognitive bucket. So, Nell, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Tom, for all the introduction. So I feel like I'm more confident to introduce my stuff while with a well-situated environment. I guess I need to introduce myself a little bit. So I'm originally from China. Spent, I guess, up until when I was 20 in China, and then I went to Columbia in New York, did my several degrees there. So I switched between a career in communications and journalism to government, and then to university digital strategy at Columbia, and then decided to go back to school, and then got a PhD in cognitive science, and recently moved to Arizona State. So it's not really a typical path. And why would I be interested in this area, online education? Well, the reason was because I grew up in probably, not one of those coastal provinces in China, so I did not really have access to a computer or internet until I was in college or about to graduating from college. And then it was the access to online learning content. At that time, it was MIT OpenCourseWare that really helped me to gain an advantage in terms of language learning and to see what's going on, what is available out there, and kind of to help me to expand that what I can do is beyond my parents' professions or my next door neighbor's profession. So you do need, as a child, some inspiration or opportunity to expand your horizon. So I really feel like I benefited so much from those even unstructured online videos, content, and that just helped me dramatically in terms of getting me from a college in China to apply for a pretty great graduate program in Columbia. So I wonder, what if we can offer a better structured and more streamlined and tailor-designed education online to students in need? Would that generate some, tremendous power to just make the human being better? So that is always staying deep down in my heart. What I can do to help, and what exactly happened to me that I can tell people, or we can replicate what may be my experience, right? So I sometimes I don't really know when people ask me what happened and what works for you, that you were able to pick up those online videos and then you did what you can and you get a good score, standardized test, and then you were able to get an education in the US. I was not able to answer that. I have a lot of friends from my families, relatives, kids, they all ask me. But I asked myself, I don't know. I usually tell them, well, why don't you just go study harder? And then there are all sorts of online content there. I think if you just go there and it can solve your problem. But reality is not like that. I can't really unpack that and then give people a recipe to the path to a better education or life. So that became something I wanted to understand more, and then that brought me back to graduate school again. So this particular study is something related to my passion on two aspects. One is, what exactly contributes to a student, a learner's success, both in academic success and later on their professional development success, that is beyond just getting a good score of their math, English composition. Because believe it or not, if you're working in a company and you're looking at the profiles of your directors, your CEOs, they don't necessarily have a better SAT and GRE than you. And what makes them stand out to be your boss and not you, right? And you may say they have better leadership skills. And what does that even mean? How can I get to become someone who has better leadership skills? Does that just mean that someone need to put me in a leadership position so I can train myself? Or could we start somewhere, right? And all those so-called soft skills are one of those things we all believe we know them, such as goal orientation, self-starting, grit, resiliency. we don't really sit down and discuss what those terms mean to us, right? Because consciously or unconsciously, we think we all know them. They're common terms. But in terms of actionable insights, as research scientists, what we can do with the availability of the large-scale online courses, with what the big data can empower us to do. And right now, a lot of our colleagues are doing big data analysis in terms of modeling learning behavior, and their success metrics would be, did they pass? Did they get a good score or not? And I'm interested in, could we also leverage this environment to see what are some of the learning behaviors and learning outcomes that correspond to the specific non-cognitive soft-skill traits? And does that give us any insights on how could we help our students to learn online, not only academically, but I guess what are the skill sets that is most needed? We need to identify them. Is it really resiliency? Is it really grit? And does that apply for learners in this major, business, medicine, and do they all need the same kind of traits or not? So that's the motivation. I don't want to go through every single slide and I guess, okay, let me see. Because I've done this presentation at least 2 times already. I feel like I'm cheating to just, repeat whatever I did for other universities. But I do want to introduce the team on this specific study. And I've already done the background. Let's go to research question. So I wanted to know the online learning environment. One of the benefits is, you can do this with a lot of flexibility. We know is, you can do it at home when you're in pajamas, but some other times it is about the benefit of being alone sometimes. I know we need the social group support, but a lot of times when you, there are also social pressures, right? But when you're really having, a full-time job and then you don't really have time to dress up to go to the classroom. And if you fail, you may be able to do it again without sharing that out loud with your classmates. And one thing I found particularly interesting is for students who succeeded, not just because they succeeded after their first try, but also, they failed at least one time and they come back and then tried it again. What makes those?
What do you call fail? How do you define fail?
How do I define?
How do you define fail?
Fail the class. So for a specific class, sorry about that. So for one specific course, college algebra, and if you fail the class, meaning you didn't pass, and you were given the opportunity to just come back and take it again. So
it includes non-completion as well?
Non-completion, well, I guess we don't really prevent people from coming back, right? There's not a rule.
For the Math 117 course, this would not include non-completion. Okay. So in this case, it would actually be a student who got through to the end.
Who actually sat the exam and failed.
Yeah. You finished the class, you did not pass the class, right. and then you chose to take it.
Yeah. So I guess in this data set, we don't have that incomplete students because it's a small one. And then it is the research context. It is within our ESU online environment, and then this course is designed in the adaptive environment, ALEX. And to assess the non-cognitive skill sets, we partnered with this company called Indigo Project, and they designed this online activity, or what you want to say, assessment interface, where you, as a degree-seeking student, and there's a online orientation course where you enter that, and then you can opt to take this assessment. So it's a combination of keyword ranking and survey questions you answer, and then for each student there are over 100 different variables generated. And for this specific study, I looked into the 25 of them, and they're called 21st century workforce readiness skill sets. Right. And then just quickly show you this Pearson correlation matrix. So these are, I don't know whether these are readable, probably not. So quickly read them, or just pick some of them. Planning, organizing, decision making, problem solving, all the way down to self-starting, time management, project management, goal orientation, leadership, accountability, resiliency, diplomacy, appreciating others. So the goal of doing this correlation matrix is just to know how they relate to each other, and then do some of the skill sets kind of tend to be more similar together than others. If you read them, on each of the little square, there is a pie chart, and the area of the pie chart and also the color of the pies correspond to the strength of the correlation. And you say they're predominantly blue, and that just means that they're mostly positive. You can see on the right hand there's a bar there, and then the red color indicates negative correlation. So in the pie chart correlation matrix, you didn't see that there are any red, so which is a good thing, because we want students to be good at those skill sets, and then it will be counterintuitive that any of those skill sets will be negatively correlated with any other skill sets. So what we did is we used principal component analysis to reduce the dimension of the 25 variables, and then after that we did 2 logistic regression models to predict 2 types of outcomes. One is just passing in general, doesn't really matter how many times you tried, and number 2 is passing the course after at least failed one time. Quick review of that, and then a quick slide on the PCA results. So, all right. So this is coming out of a PCA based off those 25 variables, and obviously it is open to interpretation on how we name those components, because you will get, I didn't have space to show those component scores, but right now, let's just say that component 1 means high on empathy and teamwork. Number 2 is on high on decision making and organizational skills. And 3 is pretty much focused on creativity related skill sets. And number 4 is, if you're low on leadership skill set, whatever that means, or defined by this company. And component 5 is time management. Okay, so I'm not going to show you. Going to show you the two logistic regression tables. And obviously, you see we're using the component numbers here, but I will give you a summary slide so you know what is component 1 and 5. But bear in mind that, so compare this slide with the next one. We're using a different outcome measure, passing after failure, and it gives us 2 different significant results. And so passing after failure, we found out that component 2 and component 4 stood out as more prominent. So very quickly, to review what we just saw on those 2 logistic regression tables. Number 1 is learners who successfully pass the course tend to have stronger skills related to time and project management, and learners who successfully pass the course after failed attempts tend to have higher skill sets related to decision making and leadership skills. So obviously these results are open for interpretation, and intuitively for first conclusion here, I think for our online students that a lot of students are actually having their full-time job, have family members to take care of. It's really intuitive to know that how do you manage your time. That is really relevant to how you perform in your degree program online. And for number 2, this is interesting because in this logistic regression model because I thought I would say resiliency skill be one of the strongest predictor, but it did not show that. And instead, we found that decision making and leadership are critical if you were able to pass after experience failure. So I'm not entirely sure why this happened, but my thinking is it may relate to how many years you've worked in an industry or whatever field you're in, that if you have experienced more complex situations in your work and you know how to deal with failure as a leader in your group, that may help you say that when you failed a course, you won't feel as fragile or vulnerable or defeated as someone who had, very little real world experience, let's just say that, right? And obviously, we will want to know more about how these attributes connect to students' learning behavior, and we also want to diversify our outcome measures. So right now we're looking into just within one course. We want to know if some other courses or domains, what if it's not a math course? What if it's, say English composition or physics? Does the same result still apply? And longitudinally, if we use a different kind of outcome measure, say successfully graduated from this bachelor's degree program, or even I found a job within, before, even, within 2 months of graduation, if we use those kind of measures, will we learn more about it? So this is a really brief exploratory study, and I hope you, and that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Elle. I'm going to show not an entire study, but I wanted to show one more piece of work on an adaptive engine called ALEX. ALEX is it's a rather old school approach to adaptive technology in which they build out an entire hierarchy of knowledge. You can do that in some subjects like algebra, and this is the same course that Elle was just talking about, the non-cognitive work. This is actually about a natural experiment that occurred as our faculty online and on campus. We were already doing ALEX in our MOOC space. It was so successful that our online and on campus math faculty decided that they wanted to move to ALEX for all of their courses. So this would be a blended course in the on-campus variety. Meet 1 day a week to work with the students and then let them work on the ALEX. In the online space, it's kind of a different kind of hybrid course. It's traditional online instruction plus the ALEX engine.
And so is the traditional online instruction, is that largely like, say, video kind of lecture-y?
In this, it's variable, but in this course, it was something, I believe they were using cogbooks before. So they had put together, it was nice, but it had some video capture, but also it had some crude branching trees that students would work through, but nothing that said, I see where you're having problems, let me redirect you out here. And the ALEX platform relies not only on this hierarchy, but also on a Vygotskian notion of zones of proximal development. So it says, based on your analysis, the history of your analysis, you can order integers, but you can't do polynomials. I'm gonna suggest here are 3 topics that you might be able to learn from, and the student works on them. If they get it, it accelerates them. If they don't, it remediates them. So an important part of this is that they're self-remediating. It's intended to be self-remediating. So in the beginning of 2016, faculty adopted this ALEX engine for college algebra. They eliminated a developmental maths course, and that maths course, developmental course, if students scored low on their placement exam, they went into this developmental course for a whole semester, then into college algebra. If you scored high, you could go directly in. So that was eliminated. And then these students were also allowed to stretch a section. So if they got somewhere towards the end of the course and they were going to fail, rather than getting a failing grade, they were allowed to simply take that on to the next semester. It's a success story, as you can see. This is one of the reasons that we've really focused on this, is try to extract out why is it successful and is it successful for everybody. So 40% B or better mastery, roughly 40% 2015, introduce that intervention there, and it jumps up to about 60%. That's the overall story. But I'll also introduce this. Not only did it work well for the higher ability students, but the lower ability students, again, without having to remediate for a whole semester, showed a significant gain, but the slope of this line is significantly less than the slope of that line. That's good news and bad news. It's good news that they're learning better in this environment, it would seem. It's bad news that the knowledge gap is increasing between high ability and low ability students. That gets even more complex as we think about the demographic groups. So there's the overall effect that you just saw. If we look at men versus women, underrepresented versus overrepresented people groups, low socioeconomic versus high socioeconomic, first generation, continuing generation. Good news, we see that increasing, but what's a little bit hard to see in this is that for the underrepresented group, that's increasing less in the same way that it did for the low maths ability. And I'll just finish on that one. As we look at the gain, indeed, overall, it's about 20 percentage points on average. But for each of these groups now, the low math ability, especially the low math ability within the underrepresented or the disadvantaged group, is the smallest, and smallest. Again, good news, all positive gains, but we do need to be concerned, and we need to now be asking why, and what, and more importantly, what can we do to remediate that? And I'm going to finish on this slide and take questions. I've given you just a small one. Yeah. So we'll just take a show of hands. Whoever, if we get 2 votes for the same thing, we'll answer the question and be done. I've been showing grade-based analyses. Grades are great. I think we have probably optimized in such a way that grades are functionally useful to employers. They're not totally without meaning, but I think we can do better. And given that our world is changing, probably it's going to take many years for the grades to catch up with that and reflect the 21st century skills and content that are going to be necessary. So maybe we should be asking those questions ourselves. So I'm just going to leave it with some thoughts here. Other ways of answering the same question. What do students want from their higher education experience? What do their employers want? What does our world need? And here are, from my own experience, from a literature review, and from interviewing hundreds and hundreds of faculties informally over the years, these are some of the answers that I've come up with. What do students want? They want to get a job that's fulfilling, that makes some money, of course. But even just talking to students, it doesn't stop there. Students want to become a better person. They want to gain a diverse perspective, contribute to the economic stability of the world. They want to become more creative. They want to produce knowledge and innovation. They want to achieve their own particular idiosyncratic goals. They want to solve social problems. They want to make the world a better place. That's one of my favorites. I hear that all the time from students. Why are you here? I want to make the world a better place. Great. Are our grades actually reflecting your propensity, your ability to do that? To acquire knowledge and skills and meta skills, the sorts that Elle talked about, to become a better citizen, not just in our local community and state, but now increasingly in the world. So I'm just going to leave those up for us to reflect on, and I think we've got another 10 minutes here. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments, particularly questions for Elle on hers, the probably most substantial of the particular experiments. But thank you very much. Yeah, please.